The crackling fire cast dancing shadows across Julian Thorne's face as he sat at the edge of the bed, stripped of his usual armor of three-piece suits and iron control. Elena Vance watched him from across the dimly lit room, her heart hammering against her ribs. How had she ended up here, snowbound in a mountain lodge with a man who had barely spoken her name in 3 years without it sounding like a command? Outside, the blizzard screamed against the cabin walls, but inside, the silence was deafening. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he stared at his phone. No signal, no way to reach his son Leo for his birthday. Elena saw something she'd never witnessed in all her years at Thorne Global. Her boss, the legendary CEO who ran board meetings like military operations, looked utterly lost. "I promised him I'd be there," Julian whispered, more to himself than to her. "I promised him I'd never miss another birthday." Elena remembered Leo's word from the office holiday party, when a shy 8-year-old had tugged her sleeve and said, "My dad works really hard. I think he's lonely, but he won't tell anyone." If only Leo could see his father now, vulnerable and human in the firelight. If you're hooked already, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. This story of unexpected connection and transformation will warm your heart more than any fireside. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Julian Thorne had built his empire on discipline. At 38, he was known throughout the corporate world as the CEO who never missed a deadline, never broke protocol, and never, ever mixed business with emotion. His staff whispered that he arrived at Thorne Global before dawn and left after midnight, that his schedule was planned to the minute, and that the only time his expression softened was during the brief daily video call with his son. Elena had witnessed this firsthand for 3 grueling years. As his executive assistant, she'd mastered the art of anticipating his needs, organizing his impossible schedule, and maintaining professional distance, even when she secretly admired the dedication she saw in his eyes during those calls with Leo. She'd watched him build walls so high around his heart that even his own child couldn't fully scale them. But she'd also noticed what others hadn't. The way Julian's jaw would tighten when other executives talked about their family weekends, the photographs of Leo that multiplied on his desk each month as if trying to compensate for missed moments, the heaviness in his voice when he'd reschedule yet another parent-teacher conference. Elena had learned to read Julian Thorne the way meteorologists read storm patterns, by studying the smallest shifts in atmosphere pressure. On Monday mornings, his jaw set a particular way that meant someone's quarterly report would be dismantled with surgical precision. When his left hand tapped twice against his desk, a meeting was about to end exactly 30 seconds early, whether or not the presenter had finished. And when he said "interesting" in that flat, measured tone, it meant the exact opposite. 3 years at Thorne Global had taught her that surviving Julian meant understanding his rhythm. He arrived at 6:45 every morning, not 6:30 or 7. His coffee was black, served at precisely 180 degrees. Conference calls started on the second, never the minute. Deviation from these patterns didn't just irritate him. It seemed to physically pain him, as though disorder itself was a personal attack. The other assistants had fled within months. Sarah lasted 6 weeks before bursting into tears during a presentation review. Marcus made it to 3 months before accepting a position elsewhere, muttering something about working for a robot. Even the executives kept their distance, communicating through Elena whenever possible, as if she were a translator for an alien species. But Elena had stayed, partly because she needed the salary that came with hazard pay for impossible bosses, partly because underneath the rigid exterior, she'd glimpsed something else. The way Julian's hand would hover over his phone during lunch hours, as if fighting the urge to call his son. The family photo on his desk that he adjusted every morning, making sure Leo's face caught the light. The exhaustion she sometimes saw behind his eyes when he thought no one was watching. The weariness of a man carrying far too much alone. The weather alert had flashed across Elena's screen at 9:15 on Thursday morning. Severe winter storm warning, mountain passes expected to close by evening. She'd barely finished reading it when Julian appeared at her desk, already wearing his charcoal overcoat. We leave for the mountain estate in 20 minutes, he said, not looking up from his tablet. The Castellano merger papers need signatures today. Their board meets tomorrow morning in Tokyo. Elena glanced at the weather radar blooming red and purple across her monitor. Mr. Thorne, the meteorologists are saying, we'll be there and back before the storm hits. His tone allowed no discussion. The helicopter can outrun weather systems. But Elena had learned that Julian's certainty often masked something else. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his thumb kept swiping across his phone screen, even though he wasn't reading anything. Then she saw it, a reminder notification that popped up and disappeared. Leo's birthday party, 6 p.m. He was running from something, and it wasn't to a merger. The drive to the helipad took 15 minutes through downtown traffic. Julian spent it on back-to-back calls, his voice clipped and efficient, while Elena watched the sky darken to an ominous gray. When they arrived, the pilot was studying his instruments with a furrowed brow. Mr. Thorne, I have to advise against this flight. The front is moving faster than predicted. Julian's jaw set in that familiar way. I'm paying you to fly, not to provide weather commentary. The papers are time-sensitive. The pilot exchanged a glance with Elena, and she saw her own concern reflected back. But Julian was already climbing aboard, his phone pressed to his ear, his back turned to all of them, to reason, to warning, to everything except the voice of whatever he was trying to outrun. The helicopter had made it halfway before the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets, tight with concern. We need to land. Now. Visibility's dropping too fast. They'd set down at a small airstrip 20 miles from the estate, and Julian had immediately arranged for a car service, his expression carved from stone. Elena watched him dismiss the pilot's protest with a curt nod, his fingers already dialing the estate manager to have the lodge prepared. The SUV's windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the snow as they climbed the mountain road. What had started as scattered flurries had transformed into a white curtain that erased the world beyond 10 feet. The driver, an older man who'd worked these mountains for decades, gripped the wheel with both hands. Mr. Thorne, I really think we should turn back, he said, his voice strained. I've seen storms like this before. The road could close behind us. Keep going. Julian didn't look up from his laptop, but Elena noticed his knuckles had gone white against the armrest. The SUV crawled forward, chains biting into ice. Elena's stomach lurched as they rounded a curve, and the back tires slid sideways before catching. Through the swirling snow, she could barely make out the cliff edge just feet away, the valley below swallowed by white nothing. Then, like a mirage, the lodge materialized through the storm. Stone and timber emerging from the trees, windows dark, looking more like a fortress than a retreat. The driver pulled as close to the entrance as possible, the vehicle already half buried in accumulating snow. Julian climbed out into the wind, and Elena followed, the cold stealing her breath. Behind them, the road they just traveled had already disappeared, erased by the storm as thoroughly as if it had never existed. They were completely, utterly cut off. The lodge was colder inside than Elena had expected, the heating system struggling against the dropping temperature. Julian had immediately moved to the study, spreading the merger documents across the mahogany desk with mechanical precision, as if pretending everything was proceeding according to plan. Elena was checking the kitchen supplies when she heard his voice from the other room, softer than she'd ever heard it. Hey, buddy. Happy birthday. She froze, her hand halfway to a cabinet door. Through the doorway, she could see Julian's back, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand braced against the desk as though holding himself upright. I know I promised I'd be there. Something came up with work, but I'm gonna make it up to you, okay? We'll do something special this weekend. Just you and me. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. What kind of cake did Grandma make? Chocolate? With the change in his posture was immediate. He pulled the phone away, staring at the screen. Leo, can you hear me? He moved to the window, holding the phone up, his movements growing more desperate. The signal. Leo. Elena watched as he tried 3 more times, each attempt ending in frustration. Finally, Julian set the phone down on the desk with exaggerated care, the kind of control that spoke of barely contained chaos beneath. "Mr. Thorne?" Elena ventured from the doorway. He didn't turn around. His reflection in the darkening window showed an expression she'd never seen: raw, unguarded pain. "I told him I'd call back before he blew out the candles." His voice was hollow. "I promised him this time would be different. That work wouldn't." He stopped, his jaw working. 8 years old, and I've already taught him that my promises mean nothing. The lights died with a soft electric sigh, plunging the lodge into darkness so complete that Elena couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. She heard Julian's sharp intake of breath from across the room, then the sound of him moving, furniture scraping. "Stay where you are," he said, his voice tight. "Let me find." A crash. The unmistakable sound of something expensive shattering against the floor. "Mr. Thorne?" "I'm fine." But his voice came from a different direction than she'd expected, disoriented. "There should be flashlights in the kitchen, and emergency supplies in the basement." Elena felt her way along the wall, her fingers trailing over wood paneling until she found the kitchen doorway. Her eyes were adjusting now, the faintest gray light filtering through the windows from the snow's reflection. She could make out Julian's silhouette, closer than she'd realized, close enough that when she stepped forward, her shoulder brushed against his chest. They both froze. "Sorry," she murmured, stepping back, but his hand caught her elbow, steadying, not controlling. "Careful, there's broken glass." His breath was warm against her temple. "Just stay close. We'll move together." They found the flashlights in the third drawer she tried, and the relief of light felt almost painful. Julian's face in the beam looked unfamiliar without its usual certainty, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his shirt collar open where he'd loosened his tie. The basement stairs were narrow, forcing them to descend single file, Elena leading with the flashlight while Julian's hand rested lightly on her shoulder for guidance. The generator was old, temperamental. It took both of them to coax it to life. Julian holding the flashlight between his teeth while Elena pulled the cord, then switching positions, their hands tangling in the darkness, working in an unplanned synchronicity that felt strangely intimate. When the generator finally coughed to life, neither of them moved away immediately. The generator had restored minimal power, but only to the master bedroom and its adjoining bathroom. Elena discovered this while checking the other rooms, each one growing progressively colder as she moved further from the main suite. Her breath clouded in the air of the guest room, frost already forming on the inside of the windows. Julian stood in the doorway of the master bedroom when she returned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "The heating system is zoned. This is the only room that's going to stay warm enough overnight." Elena looked past him at the king-sized bed dominating the space, its heavy quilt and pillows suddenly seeming very significant. "I'll be fine on the couch downstairs." "You'll freeze." He said it flatly, without room for argument, but then something shifted in his voice. "Elena, I'm not going to let you risk hypothermia because of—" He gestured vaguely between them. "Professional protocol." The use of her first name struck her more than his concern. In 3 years, he'd never called her anything but Miss Vance. "I can sleep on the floor," she offered. "If you have extra blankets." "Don't be ridiculous." Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd rarely seen. "We're both adults. We can share a room without." He trailed off, seeming to realize he didn't know how to finish that sentence. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this snowbound confession. Elena set her bag down carefully, hyper-aware of every sound she made. Julian had already claimed the left side of the bed by default, his phone charging on the nightstand, still desperately searching for a signal that wouldn't come. "I'll take the right side," she said quietly. Neither of them mentioned that there were barely 2 feet between them. The fireplace in the bedroom crackled to life after Julian spent 20 minutes coaxing it from embers. Elena had found wine in the kitchen, an expensive Cabernet that seemed wrong to drink from coffee mugs, but they had little choice. They sat on opposite ends of the small sofa, facing the fire, the space between them charged with unspoken things. Julian stared into his mug for a long moment before speaking. Leo's mother left when he was 2, walked out one Tuesday morning and never came back. His voice was eerily calm, as if reporting on someone else's life. No note, no explanation, just gone. Elena's breath caught. In 3 years, she'd never heard him mention his ex-wife. I found out later she'd been planning it for months. New identity, new city, new life. One without the weight of motherhood. He took a long drink. So I built systems, schedules, control. Because if I could control everything, every meeting, every deadline, every minute, then nothing could fall apart again. No one could just disappear. But Leo isn't disappearing, Elena said softly. He's right there, waiting for you to let him in. Julian's jaw tightened. And what about you, Miss Vance? 3 years, and you've never mentioned family, friends, anyone waiting for you at home. The observation stung because it was true. My parents wanted a daughter who'd marry well and host dinner parties. I wanted to prove I could build something on my own. She smiled without humor. Turns out being professionally indispensable is just another kind of loneliness. Is that why you stayed? Julian's eyes found hers across the firelight. With an impossible boss who barely saw you as human? I stayed because I saw you, Elena admitted. The real you behind all that control. The father who rearranges Leo's photos every morning. Who's terrified of failing him the way you think you've already failed. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through ice-frosted windows. The world outside transformed into blinding white perfection. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she felt the warmth beside her, Julian's arm draped across her waist, his breath steady against her shoulder. Sometime during the night, they'd gravitated toward each other. The careful distance they'd maintained had dissolved in sleep, leaving them tangled together under the heavy quilt. Elena's first instinct was to pull away, to restore professional boundaries, but Julian stirred before she could move. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with an expression she'd never seen before, soft, unguarded, almost wondering. He didn't pull back or apologize. Instead, his hand moved from her waist to trace her jawline with his thumb, a question in the gesture. I asked you to stay last night, he said quietly, his voice rough with sleep. Not as my assistant. I need you to understand that. Elena's heart hammered. Julian, for 3 years, you've seen every version of me. The tyrant in board meetings. The father who can't get it right. The man so afraid of losing control that he forgot how to live. His eyes searched hers. But you never looked away. You never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. Through the window, Elena could see the road beginning to emerge as snow plows worked their way up the mountain. Reality was returning, the storm passing, but something fundamental had shifted between them in the night. What happens when we go back? She whispered. Julian's answer was to pull her closer, his forehead resting against hers. Everything changes. I'm done pretending I can do this alone. Done choosing fear over the people who matter. He paused. Done pretending you're just my assistant. The Monday morning executive meeting started exactly on time, but everything else was different. Julian stood at the head of the conference table with Elena beside him. Not behind taking notes, but beside him as director of operations, a promotion he'd announced that morning with characteristic efficiency. Effective immediately, Thorne Global will implement flexible working hours for all staff, Julian said, his tone brooking no argument. Remote work options for parents. Mandatory vacation time. And no meetings scheduled after 5 p.m. unless it's a genuine emergency. The executives exchanged confused glances. Marcus Chun, the CFO, cleared his throat. Julian, the quarterly targets, will be met by people who aren't burned out and resentful. Julian's expression softened slightly. I've spent 3 years building a company at the expense of everything else. That ends now. Elena caught his eye and smiled. The previous evening, he'd picked her up at 7, not for a business dinner, but for something far more terrifying. Leo had answered the door of Julian's brownstone, his eyes going wide when he saw his father holding Elena's hand. Leo, This is Elena. She's very important to me." The boy had studied her with the serious expression that mirrored his father's. "Are you the lady who answers Dad's phone when I call?" "I am," Elena had said, kneeling to his level. "He talks about you," Leo confided. "He says you're the smartest person he knows." Then, with the brutal honesty of 8-year-olds, "Are you going to stay or leave like Mom did?" Julian had frozen, but Elena held Leo's gaze. "I'm staying. Your dad and I, we're building something together. And that includes you if you'll let us." Leo had considered this, then nodded solemnly and taken her hand. "Okay, do you like pizza? Dad always burns it." That's the end of our story. If these heartfelt moments touched you, please subscribe and drop a comment telling us what country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community. Your support means everything, and we have so many more stories of unexpected love and transformation coming your way.